You want, we can get going.
Sure.
Everyone, I want to introduce you to Kelly Zatunian. She is the owner and lead vet at Starwood Equine Vet Services. That you're based in Woodside,
I am. Yep.
and they have offices or vets that handle the East Bay, the South Bay, North Bay, and are you expanding even farther?
No. No, no plans to.
No
We're
plan.
just in the greater Bay Area for sure.
Okay. And so this is our second year of working with Starwood. They have been very gracious about putting together educational programs for us on topics that our members have expressed interest in. So we are tonight discussing disaster preparedness for horse owners, and that includes fire safety and fire health for our horses. The last couple of years, as we all know, fires have been extraordinarily top of mind, if not impacting everyone with smoke and so forth. And this year, given all the rain, it means that much more grass and that much more opportunity for some big fires if these crazy winds come back, summer winds. So we've seen a lot of wind this winter. Maybe we're done, who knows? But anyway, welcome, Kelly. Thank you again for doing this for us. And you can just go ahead and get started.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I love the fact that everyone is thinking in advance of our fire season and wanting to have the conversations now, because this is definitely when we should be sort of outlining some of these plans rather than when we are in the thick of the season and have the threats at hand. So thanks everyone for joining. Let's keep it casual. If you have a question, if something I say sparks your interest and you want to talk a little bit further, please don't hesitate to unmute yourself, get my attention, raise your hand, or throw it in the chat. And maybe Vicky can keep an eye on that for me.
Mhm.
And I'm happy to segue into whatever conversations are of most benefit to you all. So with that, we'll get going. So the outline for tonight is to discuss the difference between an emergency versus a disaster, and then really get into disaster preparedness, assessing your risk factors, coming up with not only a community plan, but also an individual plan. Also having action items for both, including transportation and the first aid supplies that you'll need. I'll share some resources that Starwood has available to you via our website, or you can request hard copies. And I know a couple of questions came in advance of the meeting that I will be more than happy to address, along with any others that come up as we talk.
Great.
Um, Thanks so much, Vicki, for the introduction. So I am the owner of Starwood Equine. I am also a horseback rider, though I haven't had time lately. And this is part of our team, mostly the peninsula-based team that I happen to catch in this photo. But we also have 3 doctors, about to be 4 doctors in the East Bay, and 3 technicians over here as well, or over there as well, I should say. So what's the difference between an emergency and a disaster? An emergency refers to a small scale, typically an individual or a small number of horses, versus disasters, which tend to affect a large number of animals and people and potentially regions. In an emergency situation, we're in one location versus, this regional concern that we spoke about with disasters. Emergencies tend to occur without warning, and disasters may have some advanced warning, or at least some of those risk factors like the heavy winds in the middle of summer that Vicki referred to. So we're going to focus in on those disasters and way that we can prepare for them, though many of the helpful hints will actually help you be more prepared in an emergency situation as well. So what does it mean to be prepared? It means having our list of pre-planned actions that enable us to rapidly make decisions and jump into response mode. Emergencies and disasters are certainly not the time to be making initial decisions or figuring out, where are the truck and trailer keys? Do I have gas in it? Are the tires in good shape? Does my horse load? We don't want to be facing those stressors when it's already stressful enough in these emergency or disaster situations. So when it comes to assessing our risk, we really do need, in our area at least, to think about earthquakes, wildfires, tsunamis for our coastal clients out in Half Moon Bay, barn fires, hurricanes, not so much, although I think there was a tornado in Los Angeles a week or two ago. So you just never know these days. And then something that I actually had to add a bullet point to the list, which was snowstorm. So I am over on the peninsula up in the Santa Cruz Mountains, and this is not Lake Tahoe. This is my backyard. And we had 5 inches of snow and power outages and everything else. Access was an issue. I think that this was tree number 5 on the drive down our road to get out. So, not only might you find yourself in a situation where it's difficult for you to get out of the barn or get to your horse, get your horse out of there, it may also be difficult for your veterinarian to make it to you in some of these disaster situations. So always having those plans and alternative options is extremely helpful for everyone. So let's start with that community action plan. What can we do, as a barn, as a roadway where a lot of horses are kept? I know from my work over in the East Bay, there's pockets and regions of barns and facilities that all share common spaces and common access and egress points. And so I think knowing what the plan is within the barn, but also working with other barns in your general area can be super helpful. I highly recommend coming up with a communication plan that's discussed well in advance of actually needing to put it to use. That can include a phone tree, which sounds sort of old school at this point to actually need a phone tree, but it comes in handy when internet is down and you can't instantly get a hold of anybody. Landlines, I still don't have a landline, I think, from the last round of storms, which was maybe a month ago, but everyone is so overwhelmed with getting people back up and running with power over here that AT&T hasn't had access to the lines because PG&E is taking over first. It's better to text rather than call if possible, so that lines are not tied up. And you should consider the use of WhatsApp because it does tend to work a little bit more reliably in low service or low signal areas. So this is not by any means a plug for WhatsApp, other than to say it is readily usable and has come in handy. I know when I've worked on some of the disaster response from fires in previous seasons, the responders tend to get channels on WhatsApp so that we can get in touch with each other. Writing down phone numbers also is one of those things that we don't think we ever need to do because we can just usually grab our cell phone. But if the power's out and you don't have a charger to get, the phone charged back up, and you really need to get in touch with somebody who either is taking care of your horse, has a truck and trailer that you need, et cetera, having those numbers written down where you can readily access them is super important because it is highly likely that power will either be turned off proactively in a fire situation by PG&E or will be cut off because of issues. You want to stay updated with your state and local emergency alerts, and a resource that I show you a little bit later will give you access to those, or you can actually scan that QR code that's on the screen, and that should take you to the website that gives you links to the different emergency channels. I subscribe to all of them so that I know what's going on in our entire call area, so that we're able to really watch for the safety of our team and to know when we might need to be expecting or responding to particular calls to help our clients. The things that you want to talk about when you get together as a group at the barn, you want to know where to go. You need to know how you're going to get there and have multiple evacuation routes in mind and practiced, meaning, you're not just going to talk about it, you're actually going to get that truck and trailer and you're going to drive those routes to make sure that they are, readily accessible, you feel comfortable, or whoever's hauling the truck and trailer feels comfortable going in either of those directions. You want to know who can drive. How are you going to get horses off the property if that's an option? Who's responsible for maintaining a truck and trailer that's ready to go? It may not be that everybody at the barn has one. There might not be space available to store that many trucks and trailers. So who has one? Where is it located? And who's making sure that it stays up to date and in all of the safety concerns so that it's ready to be utilized at a moment's notice. This is a really difficult point to share with everybody, but prioritizing the order of evacuation may become necessary and should be discussed in advance of any sort of emergency situation. So in my times responding and helping with responses, the worst situation that occurs is, we only have this much time and this many trailer loads of horses before the road gets shut down by emergency responders and they no longer let us in and out. So what is the order of go for the horses that are at that particular barn? And that is going to be a discussion that you have to have with everyone that's there. But I would suggest that horses that will readily load and get along with each other and not injure each other on the trailer would be my recommendation. So sort of having that game plan in place can be of huge benefit. Nobody wants to say, your horse has to stay. We only have time to take these horses. It's even worse if you're trying to make that decision with limited time and resources available to you. Keeping a copy of the plan at your local emergency management office with all of the boarders at your facility, with the barn manager is key. And you need to have electronic copies and also hard copies because, again, if the phone dies or you can't access internet on that shared Google Drive, you need to have that plan readily implementable by whoever is present to help get the ball rolling. Keeping defensible space around the barn can also be really important and is something that I think does take a village. You can have barn cleanup days. You can actually get the local fire department to come and give recommendations and often actually help with some of that if the defensible space would actually help to give them better access, or if it's along roadways or things like that where they might be involved. So reach out to the local fire department. They can at least, at a minimum, give advice, and sometimes will actually come in and chip in and help. For individual preparation, I think the first thing to do and a big takeaway that is very easily implemented is to identify your horse. So we need both permanent identification, which could be a microchip, tattoo, or brand. We also need sort of proof that your horse is your horse. So having photos of you with your horse in it can be helpful. Using a livestock marker for writing the name and number on the horse. This gives you an example of that here with Montana. Writing a luggage tag into the mane may be helpful, especially if your horse just is getting thrown on a trailer and everybody's just kind of going and you're going to be diverted to whatever evacuation center is available. That is not a permanent identification, but it certainly would give somebody on the receiving end the ability to call you and say, hey, Montana just arrived. He's at the Vallejo Evacuation Center. He looks just fine. Get here when you can, but we're taking care of him. Permanent marker on the hooves can be a quick and easy if you don't get around to doing more of these permanent things. Everyone has a Sharpie readily available to them. So at a minimum, this would work unless you have a horse with black feet. And then if that's the case, you need to get some silver permanent marker or gold permanent marker. Identification tags on the halters can be helpful. These QR codes actually give you links to some of the halter identification options that are out there that I've seen utilized and are pretty handy to have. My big takeaway, and you'll see it again a little bit later, but do not leave nylon halters or non-breakaway halters on horses. That is just asking for trouble. In a fire situation, that nylon will melt. And in a situation where you have to leave horses out or loose somewhere, the non-breakaways could lead to further injury. Microchipping your horses is a really simple, minimally invasive procedure that gives you permanent identification for your horse and can be hugely beneficial for response at an evacuation center. You might not show up with your horse at that facility, so having that ability to identify the horse and contact you is really helpful for those that are again receiving at the evacuation center. It also is a protection for you in proving that your horse is indeed your horse. Unfortunately, there are people who take opportunity and advantage in disaster situations, and horses are stolen at these facilities, or there are attempts to steal the horses at these facilities. So proof that your microchip horse matches the papers that you have in your hand with your ownership can be really helpful. So we say travel papers or a health certificate. In these disaster or emergency response situations, you are not going to have had the foresight to call your veterinarian and have a health certificate printed up for them. That said, you may have a Coggins pulled on your horse that has identifying pictures, it has brand information, microchip information, and your information. So that would be something that I would want to keep on hand. Certainly, you want to have your insurance information and phone number, both in hard copy and digital. Cash on hand is important in the event of a large scale disaster. Maybe there's not power or ATMs, and you might not be able to use credit cards. Robin, I will happily provide, and for anyone else looking, it sounds like the identification tags for the halters, those websites are no longer active. So I will be sure to get Vicki active links because the company is great and I've seen those tags and they're pretty nice. You also want to make sure that your horse is up to date on vaccinations, specifically flu rhino, influenza, rhinopneumonitis, and strangles. So I will say flu rhino is highly recommended. You should absolutely have your horse vaccinated for that every 6 months. Strangles is not considered one of the core vaccinations, but in high risk evacuation facilities, or if you are in a region that is highly likely to have to be evacuated because of fires, floods, etc., strangles is a highly communicable disease. It is very commonly seen in these high number, high stress, commingled herds. And so it's something that we as a practice do recommend if you're in that situation or you might be in that situation. But flu rhino for sure. I alluded to the Coggins test. So that's, again, not something that we typically run as a standard test here in California. It's required for county by county travel in Virginia and many of the other states on the East Coast where I'm from. Not as common here, but it is a simple blood test that does give your horse and you paperwork that shows your ownership and their markings and things like that. So if you were looking for a way to have just sort of some documentation on hand, that would be a really quick and simple way to do it. You also want to have access to ongoing medications that your horse is on. And what I would recommend is actually keeping some spare doses at home. So this is diphenhydramine and allergy medication. More common ones that I'm thinking of that I remember when horses were starting to arrive at the Vallejo evacuation centers back in, I think, 2018 when I was working there. The biggest concerns for people when they arrived were that they did not have bute for an older arthritic horse. They did not have their Presend for their cushienoid horses who are then in a high stress situation and didn't have those medications. Sedation, some like low grade sedatives like acepromazine for kind of calming effect. Those are kind of the big ones that your horse you should have at least a week's supply on hand at home in case you are not able to make it to the barn and you just have to meet your horse somewhere and start treating them. I will give a shout out to the pharmaceutical companies that we work with. They were there with me and with the other veterinarians that were responding at that evacuation center and brought with them supplies of bute, Equiox, Presend, thyroid powder, Banamine. They had all of those things so that we could actually dispense those medications to these owners that were kind of stuck without product. So we have an amazing community, and I think it's worth saying that out loud. Packing for your horse. You want to have a halter and lead for each of your horses. As I said before, leather or breakaway, avoiding those synthetic halters, especially in fire zones. You want to keep it accessible. Don't have it locked in your tack trunk. They should be right outside the stall door. You want to have feed and water for at least 72 hours. So what does that look like? That is about 30 to 60 gallons of water per horse for those 72 hours. And it's about 2 to 3 bales of hay. If your horse is on a complete feed, then that would be, carrying the Elk Grove pellets or whatever other product you feed your horse. Making sure that you have a supply of that is also super helpful. First aid supplies that you want to have on hand. So you want supplies for wound care, bandaging material, a stethoscope and thermometer, and knowing how to use those stethoscope and thermometer to get a quick heart rate, listen to gut sounds, and get a temperature reading. Those are really great skills to have. Ask your veterinarian when they're out next to show you how to use the stethoscope and thermometer that you purchase. We are always more than happy to, because you having that little bit of information will not only help us in these disaster situations, but can also help us in triaging over the phone in an emergency situation. Wire cutters are really helpful. I can tell you that one of the biggest things that I treated at that Vallejo evacuation center were wounds from horses getting tangled in wires when they were, running around and kind of loose. It was also lots of nails in the feet, again, because I think the horses were just out and loose and in areas that were not typically frequented by their feet. Duct tape. Duct tape can help in a million different ways, so have that on hand. A knife in case your horse gets tangled up. You don't have a breakaway halter and need to cut them loose. A portable radio, flashlight, and extra batteries. Those are your quick. Everyone should have these things. And then in addition to that, I would add any medications ongoing that your horse is on. So, here's an example of those bandaging supplies and treating a foot abscess. This could also be treating, a horse that stepped on a nail, which again, I saw several of those that arrived at the evacuation center. So a little bit of white gauze, elasticon, brown gauze, and quilts and polos. If you have those on hand, those are really great to have. I can say the evacuation center wasn't set up for really having horses there all the time. So the footing was pretty hard. The shavings didn't arrive for several days, so it was fine. The horses were safe. They were out of harm's way, but they were also standing on pretty hard ground, and a lot of them ended up getting pretty stocked up in their limbs. So again, having that quilts and polos would have been nice for those horses. So back to transportation. Know who's driving. You want to know where they're going. So that could be official evacuation areas or pre-arrangements with other equine facilities. What I will say about this is you do not want to evacuate your horse just 5 or 10 minutes down the road. You want to get way down the road. I can't tell you how many people I saw who had been at 3 different facilities because they just moved a little bit away, and then that facility had to evacuate. So then they moved a little bit further away, and that facility had to evacuate. And then they ended up at these larger evacuation areas. So it's great if you can have a pre-made arrangement with other equine facilities, but they need to be well out of your area. If you're over in the East Bay, maybe you're going to come over here to the peninsula to the Woodside Horse Park, which is an evacuation center. Cow Palace is another evacuation center over on this side. Alameda County Fairgrounds, Vallejo, those are both evacuation centers on the east side of the bay. You need to know how you're getting there and have at least 2 exit routes from the farm when possible. That I realize that that's not always possible. You want to check the width and grade of the road, being sure that your truck and trailer will not get stuck and block the way for others trying to evacuate. So this is where I was referring to actually practicing driving those evacuation routes with, just with your truck at first, then with your truck and trailer to make sure that you and whoever's going to be driving feels very comfortable. And keep in mind that the situation may change. And so you need to be, readily watching and getting those alerts so that you can make new arrangements as needed. I'm not sure if anybody recognizes this road, but this is Highway 84, which is the main access out of my house. So I am now driving an extra 20 minutes to get down the hill and anywhere off the mountain, and probably will be for a while. Trailer preparation. You want to be sure that the trailer is road ready. So the tires are in good condition. The trailer floor is in good condition. The hitch is ready to go. No issues, no rusting through, no flat tires, etc. And making sure that your horses are trained to load. This is number 1. And this is something that if your horse is not readily able to load on multiple types of trailers, I would highly encourage you to start making this part of your routine on a weekly basis. Don't wait till the last minute to get this. This is just, this could be your horse making it onto the trailer and getting out of a dangerous situation, or your horse being left because it becomes dangerous for everybody to stay there trying to load them. In a situation where maybe you just can't get all of the horses out, or a horse won't load, or there's just not enough time, you should also have a plan for leaving horses in sort of a pre-selected area. It should be clear and defensible if and when possible. That could be the riding arena, a dry lot, a large pasture. This was a great question that we received in advance of tonight. You want to close off the barn, stall doors, the main barn door, if at all possible, so that horses do not go running back in, because they will. They'll go back to safety and find themselves potentially stuck or injured running in and out of small spaces. So seal off the barn, get the horses into a loose, defensible space, and, hope for the best. Leave plenty of hay and also water out. Don't rely on the automatic waters. Again, if power is lost, then they are useless. This is to give you some hope or some sense that it is okay to leave horses if that is the best option and the safest option for them and for you. In the Thomas fire, many of those horses that were left out to navigate for themselves were actually spared. If they have enough space that's defensible, they can make it. Another thing that I've seen people do in Southern California when they were evacuating from fires is they turned the horses in the arena and then put the waters for the arena on and just left that running, which kind of kept a little bit of the smoke factor down and kept them safer from the fires. After a disaster, things that we need to do as we return back to the barn are inspecting it for any potential damage, certainly checking pastures and fencing before putting horses back out, and then considering the smoke levels. We want to limit exercise when smoke is present, and I'll show you sort of a step-by-step guide for that in just a moment. We also need to consider if these horses have been exposed to smoke for a considerable amount of time, they have damaged lungs. They'll need plenty of fresh water and time in order for their airways to heal, for that inflammation to go down. That can take up to 4 to 6 weeks of rest. So horses that have been in heavy smoke situations should not be returned to work and should not follow this AQI chart that I'm about to share with you until they've been given that 4 to 6 week rest period. So we do have this activity chart that we post on our Instagram feed anytime that we are experiencing poor air quality. So we sort of try to help keep you all up to speed on our recommendations, but let's walk through those so that you feel like you have a good understanding. So on green days with an AQI of 0 to 50, keep on keeping on. There's little to no risk of air pollution for your horse. The caveat to that would be a horse that has been recently exposed to smoke. On yellow days, so AQIs of 51 to 100, you can still ride unless your horse has a pre-existing condition like heaves, allergies, heart disease. Those horses just work on groundwork. Maybe this is a horse that needs a little bit of extra brushing up on that trailer loading, and this would be something that you could do with them. We also have YouTube videos on our Starwood account that have lots of different stretches and strengthening, like core strengthening exercises that you could utilize for these days. For orange days, so 101 to 150, we really need to limit aerobic activity. We don't want horses heavy breathing. So keep it easy, trot and walk. Make sure that we, again, don't have like really heavy breathing where all those particles are making it deeper into the lungs. So think about doing exercise with the walk. You can do uneven cavalettis, which are really good for horses' proprioception. You can do pole bending. Walk with the TheraBand system so that your horse is really having to use themselves and move in that solid position, but with low intensity. We can also do in-hand exercises, so walk halt transitions, walk trot transitions, and backing up on flat ground. All great exercises for really helping stretch out the back and work the stifles. For red days, dismount. The air is getting unhealthy for horses and for people, so we just want to avoid any sort of aerobic work. This is a great opportunity, again, for you to work on those ground exercises. You can do tail pulls, hind limb mobility, front limb circles that help with stabilization, hind limb leans, which help to actually work the glutes. pelvic tucks and sternal lifts, all really helpful and beneficial exercises that I highly recommend doing on a regular basis, but this would be a really great time to still bond with your horse when the air quality is not great. And then these purple days, so anything over 200, stall rest, limit to essential activities. Essential activities being eating, drinking, cleaning the stall, grooming. That's all that you need to do. We have these resources. If anyone is interested, reach out to me. They're on laminated waterproof forms that you can write on and either clear or just leave with a Sharpie. So they're really handy to have around. And they do have access to some emergency boarding locations. They also have large animal evacuation groups. And this has actually been updated with Alameda County alerts as well. This is just a screenshot of our Peninsula version. It also has this checklist for you. So I sort of went over all of these things, but this gives you your to-dos. Your ID tags, microchip, keeping the trailer ready to go, knowing where you're going, etc. So please don't hesitate to reach out if you are interested in getting copies of those. We could maybe get some to Vicki for sharing at an in-person event for you all. I'm happy to entertain some questions. I actually have a follow-up to a couple that came in beforehand, so I'll start with those and then we can go to the chat maybe after that. And just to share with you, these are actually some pictures from fire evacuation with the NorCal Association of Equine Practitioners. So this is what the evacuation centers look like. It's, these quick stalls, not a lot of shelter, sleeping bag in the middle of the trailer for the veterinarian who's on staff. And, but the horses are safe. They're out of harm's way. It's just nothing fancy. Okay, one of the questions was asked, in a situation where you may have to evacuate or there's risk of, evacuation, do I recommend starting horses on an ulcer preventative? The answer is absolutely. These are high stress situations, commingling, changes in environment, changes sometimes in diet because you're just feeding whatever is accessible at an evacuation center, movement of horses away from their neighbor, changes in the regular routine, who's caring for them, etc. So absolutely keeping some ulcer guard on hand would be highly recommended, especially if you have sort of a high stress horse, but really for every horse, I would highly recommend it if it's in your budget. Another question was in regard to nebulization, and do we need to nebulize every horse that's been exposed to a little bit of smoke? My quick answer is no. My follow-up will be, I think the veterinarian should examine your horse and determine the need for additional medication or nebulization on a case-by-case basis. The picture on the top left is actually using a rebreathing bag, and that's testing the horse's oxygen capacity and comfort level with breathing with limited oxygen. These horses should, if they are healthy and don't have a lot of inflammation in their lungs, should be able to tolerate that bag being over their nose for a solid minute. And after the bag is pulled off, they should take a couple deep breaths. We use those deep breaths to really listen to their lungs. It's like when the doctor tells us take a deep breath and we do that really big in and out. It's doing the same thing for the horses. We're listening to the lungs. We're also checking their recovery. They should get back to breathing at 12 to 24 breaths per minute pretty quickly. If they don't, then we might be thinking, this is a horse that has some inflammation. We may want to consider some nebulization. But by no means does everybody need to go out and buy one of these machines just because it's a little bit smoky. I think we can do more harm than good, especially with some of the like add-ons and aromatics and things like that I know people were leaning on in the last round of fires. I think sometimes too much of a good thing is not a good thing. And with that, I'm going to look into questions in the chat. So for recently purchased horses, how do we update microchip ownership information? That is a great question. So you can register get the chip scanned if you don't know what the number is, and then you can go on to like Home Again. Just putting it, Home Again is one of like the very big small animal and equine based services, or PetLink is one that we also use. Go onto those websites and you just register. There's typically like a one-time lifetime registration fee for the microchip number. You put your patient's, your horse's information in there, and then they're registered. Great question. Are there any other questions from the group?
Yeah, I think you got all of the ones that were in the front end of it. I think
Awesome.
For a lot of us, it's that that decision of, do we stay or do we go? And if it is early, like you say, because we evacuated when the Livermore fire was coming down the hill, and we got out really early. It didn't end up coming down, but we all felt so much better. And then, you know, where I am, we've got 3 roads out, but it's pretty dicey, you know, getting there if it's congested. And apparently my barn owner was told by the fire department that if a fire's, you know, coming across that hill, they're going to make us shelter in place, which is really disturbing. And so I've told everyone, don't turn my horse loose, because all around us is barbed wire, and he doesn't know barbed wire. He'll just run right through it, and he could die from those injuries, versus if he was turned out in the arena or the round pen or someplace, you know, one of the paddocks that does have defensible space. I think he'd be far better off. And those are really scary things. And I think that for me is like one of the worst decisions, you know, but I had to tell everybody, don't set him loose on the road.
Yeah. And I would add, you know, don't set them loose on the road. Set them loose in a contained space, because setting them loose on the road then has the potential to create another dangerous situation. If emergency responders are trying to get through, it's smoky, they hit an animal. And that's just a danger and just a terrible thought in itself. So it's definitely, I want to be very clear, leaving them to sort of shelter in place needs to be in a contained space. Otherwise, we're actually creating potentially dangerous situations, or we're, you know, limiting the ability of our emergency responders to safely respond.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think you answered all the questions that came in, especially this last one about the meds that for just a general emergency, what to have on hand. And the funny thing is, I've got all that stuff, but I've got it back in the storage room. And so I'm thinking while you were talking, it's like, no, I need to bring it up, put it in a tub, have it either in my trailer or at the front of the barn somewhere where somebody could grab it and run, you know, and take it with, or whatever. But, or, you know, double up on everything and keep one in my truck so that I've always got it with me.
And that's a tricky, right? Because what I don't want is people to spend money. I mean, the best case scenario would be you spend money on something that you never need, right? That would be the best case scenario, is having those medications and just they go to expiration because we don't have to evacuate or we don't have the emergencies. But I do think, a Banamine paste, a couple of Dex packets if you have a horse that's highly likely to break out in hives, a little bit of sedation if you have a high-strung horse, like Dorm gel or acepromazine tablets. Those to me are the types of medications that, again, after consultation with your veterinarian, having a couple of doses on hand is super helpful in an emergency situation, especially if you consult with your veterinarian, before using it. And then certainly can be super helpful to have in these like quick response. This horse won't get on the trailer, but if I give them a little bit of Dorm gel, they will. That could make or break the situation. So.
Right, exactly. And I think horses, obviously the riders or the owners will be very tense in an evacuation kind of situation. And so that horse is going to be feeding off of all of that. So even if they're a great loader, they may go, oh no, something really bad's happening, I'm not getting in,
Exactly.
So
absolutely.
That's a good point. Okay, you've got 3 more questions down there on the chat. Oh, you did PetLink, and then somebody just, are you aware of show managers making plans for times when the AQI is too high to hold a show? Some last year started to refund a percentage of fees if that happened. There are still people who elect to compete, but that would not be me and a lot of other competitors. Yeah. I know, I don't know if you know show managers and everything, but there's been a lot of back and forth with CDS and why they continued to hold the rack in the Sacramento area when the AQI was like 250. And they didn't refund, and half the people left. They were just like, nope. And the other half stayed. And so, you're running that calculated risk, but there's not been we've asked about a standardization for shows, and when, and we asked CDS Central, are you going to come up with a definitive level that you will say you must follow this rule? And so far they're saying no. And I don't know whether USDF or USEF has come up with that either at this point. There's been a lot of talk about it, but nobody's willing to, put it in stone.
Nothing that I've seen. And I can say, I mean, I remember when we had the fires right here, and it felt a little bit like sticking my neck out, but I posted on Instagram, you should not be at the horse show. We posted on social media, and it was a little scary to do it, right? You have a whole facility and, the barn, the show managers who have a lot invested in having horses come to the show. You have trainers who are invested in getting to the show. You have owners who are invested in making it to that show. But at the end of the day, we need these high performance athletes to be able to perform at their best level, and we could be doing permanent damage to them if the air quality is that bad. So I just, for me, it's a no-brainer, but I say that realizing just how many how many factors are at play with trying to make those decisions.
Okay, so Terry just said if it's over 150, they cancel their schooling shows up in the
awesome.
Yeah,
that's great.
Yeah. And that's the thing, I think, because of the commitment that's already been made, and you've shown up at the show, you've got a hotel room costing you $200 a night, and your horse costs you $200 a day to be there, and plus. And so all of a sudden you're walking away from, if it's a big show, you're walking away from several $1,000s. And And yet at the same time, if it were your child or I mean, it's affecting the people too. And this is the thing that I think needs to be, the riders need to be aware of. It's not just your horse that's going to have inflamed lungs, it's you as well. And you could be off for 6 weeks because you're the athlete in this part, in this particular team sport. So you have to be careful of yourself as well. And I think it'll be lovely if USEF comes up with something, but I doubt if they will do it. I kind of think they'll go, we don't want to step on toes. We'll leave it up to everybody else. So, but yeah, I think that'll be interesting. Yeah, championships in 2020, that was a big problem, Robin. So, all right, well, we can let everybody go. If anybody has any more questions, pop up now. If not, thank you for joining us. And we have Starwood coming back in October, I believe, to discuss the new biologics that are available. And these, you want to give kind of a brief overview of what you guys are thinking of?
Yeah, so there was a lot of interest when we talked about complementary therapies back in the fall, with a deeper dive into all of these biologics. So Prostride versus IRAP versus alpha-2 EQ versus stem cells and Arthromed. And there are so many products out there and so much available that it's really hard to digest what is best for your individual horse and your individual needs and your finances. So our goal will be to educate on, what each of those products are, what it does, a general price point, kind of to help you compare, and then certainly indications, like in this particular type of patient, this is what we tend to use this product for. Certainly every horse is different. Every veterinarian will make a little bit of different decisions about what they're most comfortable with, or what they have readily available. But the goal will be to at least educate you all so that when you hear these options, it won't be like, what is this brand new crazy thing that people are putting to use?
Yeah, great. So I hope you will all join us for that. And keep an eye out on our CDS website. And the great thing, Starwood's letting us record this, so you can always watch it again. I encourage you to share it with your barn mates and for you barn owners especially, this can be the focus of a barn meeting, this program that she just delivered to us. And I think we don't want to hear about anybody having a tragedy, certainly, but this is great information for a lot of different situations. So whether it's a mudslide, whether it's, fire at this place. So I think we will be encouraging you all to go on our site to look at the various things and then go on to the Starwood site, because they have an entire educational platform in there that has all these PDFs and you can download and share. And it's just a great opportunity to further your education. So that is, what I encourage everybody to do. And then ours are all archived in under our educational tab as well. So, all right. Thank you so much, Kelly.
Awesome.
I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Always fun. Thanks everybody for the great questions.
Great. Thanks so much.
Have a great night.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.